read it about 68 times. And this is the parable. This is called the parable of the unjust steward. The unjust steward. We're going to be in chapter 16. We're just on the other side. Oh, I can't take it off. I'm wired. I can't take it off. Oh, not on either. Okay. Can you hear me? All right. Probably heard me okay before. But, yeah, this is on the parable of the unjust steward. But the lesson is called the faithful. Keep focused on the faithful. On the faithful. Okay? Because I tell you what, this can be a confusing little set of scripture here. It even says in the teaching information that, you know, this parable has, as far as the story is concerned, is easy to understand. As far as the story is concerned, I find that a challenge too. It's not that easy to understand. So we're going to pick through this thing and stay focused on the faithful. Now, just for a backdrop, remember, it was just last week we were in. We finished up two parables actually, but it was 3 stories, 1 parable, 3 stories. Took 2 weeks, and it was on the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost son. Right, and I'm going to call that the lost boy and the lost brother. Remember, that's how it finished up, lost brother. And it finished up at the tail end of chapter 15, verse 32. So if you're at chapter 16, you're looking that right in the face. And I wanted to bring this up last week and didn't. And verse 32, remember the prodigal son. We always call that parable the prodigal son. And if we named it more accurately, we'd probably call it the loving father. The loving father. We mentioned that a few times. And remember, the older son, after they were making all to do about the younger son coming back, the older son didn't want anything to do with that. And that's because he had a heart problem. He had a heart problem. And his father came to him just as nicely as he came to his lost son. And the one that came back, the younger son. And verse 32 said it was meet, or it was a must, that we should make merry and be glad. Because remember, this was representation of a soul getting saved and going to heaven. We ought to be excited about it. Yes. It ought to be the first thing that goes into our mind. And if you go on, even the Greek word for that is it was meet, or a must. And it carried it on to an unavoidable, compulsory necessity. It's absolutely, you can't help it. You got to do so. So that's the way the father looked at it. The older son should have looked at it that way, but he had a problem with his faith. So now we're in chapter 16. We're going to be in verses 1 through 14. But just to set the stage, remember all that parable that we talked about: the lost sheep, the lost coin, and the lost boy, and the lost his brother. All that was in one parable, and if you remember right, Christ had just told them, he who has ears, let him hear. And the ones that wanted to hear were the sinners and the publicans. Okay? The sinners and the publicans. They wanted to hear what he had to say. They were hungry. They stepped out. They were in the street. They were wherever they were, listening to Jesus. The Pharisees and the scribes, all they were to do was pointing that old finger and just giving him the blame game and telling him that, I can't even believe this guy. He's with sinners. I mean, think of that. So he obviously had the heart of the brother. He had the heart of the brother. So, but that's where he is. And the first verse we start to read here in a moment, the first word of that verse is and. So he continues right on. And this is when he goes into this week's lesson. And the first part of verse 1, I'll go ahead and say that, is, and he said also unto his disciples. So I mentioned last week, he was talking to Pharisees, or he was talking to sinners, and help my mind, sinners and tax collectors, publicans, okay? Those were the ones who want to listen, and the scribes and the Pharisees. Those were the ones that didn't want to listen, didn't want to hear what he had to hear, but had to hear what he had to say, but they did, and they listened. But this time, I even mentioned last week, The disciples weren't really mentioned, but I'm sure they were right there. Well, now he averts and turns, and he's talking directly to the disciples while this same crowd is there. That's setting the stage where we are, okay? And remember, these things are getting more serious as we get closer to the crucifixion of Jesus, which is just days down the road, just days. All right? So, in Luke chapter 16, Christ gave a parable to his disciples in the presence of the covetous Pharisees. The covetous Pharisees. They've always wanted something they didn't have, and they tried to do their best to get it. And money to them was just something they could try to get as much as they can, and can all they can get, and all that kind of thing. Okay? What was that?
Yeah, get all you can all you can.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. That's a lot of people's objective these days also. But this parable is given to teach Christ's disciples what their attitude should be toward finances. The Pharisees used their money to achieve personal gain and to manipulate others. Christ taught his followers that they were to use the things that God had placed in their hands for the cause of Christ.
Yes.
So that's what we're talking about, okay? And how you'll know it. So, let's go into the introduction. And the introduction in your notes. Is it possible that God could give a test with only one question? One question is the blank. And the answer to the one question would reveal everything about your life. And the answer to that is yes. That one question would be, are you faithful in that which is least? That's verse 10 of this. It's not the entire verse, but that's verse 10. Are you faithful in that which is least? So what we do with what we consider least reveals what we are going to do with what God considers most. We're kind of going to separate this into what was least is on the earthly plane. Things we have to deal with down here. Money being one of them. We deal with money. Right? Money's not a bad thing. Money's kind of amoral. It's not good. It's not evil. Right? It's what we do with it in our heart and how we get focused on it. But what we do with what we consider least down here reveals what we are doing with what God considers most, maybe our heavenly point. So, let's read. We'll jump right into the scripture. Luke 16, 1 through 13. And he said also unto his disciples, so they're front and center here, but of course the rest of the crowd is also listening. There was a certain rich man which had a steward, and the same was accused unto him that he had wasted his goods. And he called him and said unto him, how is it that I hear this of thee? Give an account of thy stewardship, for thou mayest be no longer steward. This man's going to get canned, in other words. He's getting the pink slip. Then the steward said in himself, what shall I do? For my Lord taketh away from me the stewardship. I cannot dig to beg, I am ashamed. He's not going to work. And to beg, he's ashamed. I am resolved what to do, that when I am put out of the stewardship, they may receive me into their houses. So he called every one of his Lord's debtors unto him, and said unto the first, how much owest thou unto my Lord? So he called out people that owed money to his boss, his Lord, that is right at the cusp of letting him go, and will let him go, no matter what. And he called his debtors out unto him, and said unto the first, how much owest thou unto my Lord? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said unto him, take thy bill, sit down quickly, and write 50, half of it. Then said he to another, and how much owest thou? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said unto him, take thy bill, and write 80%. And the Lord commended, now this goes back to his boss, that the Lord commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely, for the children of this world are in their generation, get that part, their generation, wiser than the children of light. Now Jesus is speaking here, and I say, he's speaking the whole time, but then now it's him talking. And I say unto you, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness, that when ye fail, that they may receive you into everlasting habitations. Verse 10, He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. If therefore ye have not been faithful in the unrighteous manner, who will commit your trust the true riches? Who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if ye have not been faithful in that which is another man's, who shall give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. Now, I read through. Do I understand everything in there? I tell you what, it's a toughie. That's a toughie. Although, like I told you, I bet I read it 68 times. For that reason, and that's why I also said, stay focused up here, the faithful. Verse 14, and the Pharisees also who were covetous heard all things, and they derided him, or they despised Jesus. So they heard it, and they could apply it. He was talking to them again. He was shooting right at their hearts. So they heard it. Now we're going to pick through this, and we will understand it as we go down, but it's almost comical. And I wrote one part in here that I hated to say, because you'll notice this whole parable is written in red. Jesus thinking. It's written in red. But I put down in a part in a minute here when we get to it, I said, don't get caught up in the weeds. So it sounded terrible that I said that because it's written in red. And I said, don't get caught up in the weeds. And that still stands. But so we know that remember here, let's also back up just a little bit to plant this better. Remember, a parable is a spiritual truth, like it's laid beside a story. And a parable, the whole idea of a parable is to give is the one great truth. That's why it gave parables. It was just to point out one great truth. And that one great truth is verse 10. Okay? The great truth is verse 10. You can see it there at the top of your notes. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. And he that is unjust in the least is unjust also in much. Now this servant was unjust in much. Okay? Because he not only messed with his master's stuff before he ever got called on the carpet, he was selling stuff and making sure things were given away and all this kind of thing. And he was getting a chunk of the cash, and he wasn't getting all the money. He was not charging all the money to the person, and it was just a mess. And the master found out, the Lord found out about it, and said, hey, you're not doing right with my stuff. You know, you're not doing right with my stuff, so you're out, pretty much, as a steward. That's the way you can take it. He's out as a steward. So, but that's just general. Now, back to your notes here, and this is where it starts talking about the parable, as far as the story is concerned, is easy to understand. That's debatable. But here's the meat of it. It's in your notes so you can read along and kind of catch into it. A rich man had a steward who wasted, that's the blank, his goods. He wasted his goods. The steward knew that he had been caught and would be fired. He knew that. So he devised a plan. The steward cut a deal with the master's debtors so that he might have favor with them. He might have favor with these other people because he gave them a good deal. One guy owed him 100. He said, write out a bill for 50 and you're square. He pocketed, the unjust steward pocketed the 50, and the other man got a good deal and didn't have to pay off with all that. And so now maybe that guy could help this unjust steward as he doesn't have a job anymore. Okay? She's still puzzled, but anyway, that's kind of what we're looking at. Okay? And then he did it to the second steward. How much do you owe? I owe, what did he owe?
100 of wheat.
Yeah, a week. And then he said, okay, write out 80. So he kicked it up there, 80%. So he gave the guy a deal. The guy had to pay 20% less than he would have. And he said, okay, you write out 80, we'll call it even. Steward took the money. And now he's befriended two people that may help him now that he doesn't have a job. That's kind of the way he's rolling here. No faith in God, no trust in the Lord, nothing. Okay, that's the way he's rolling. So,
Would you say that's the unjust in much part, where now he's robbing the master of 20 bushels of wheat for the one and 50 measures of oil for the first? Would that be the unjust in much part, where he's unjust in a whole lot?
well,
Maybe he was unjust in a little with the steward, and now
that's right.
things are magnified. Now he's taking away 50.
Oh yeah, right in front of the master, and the master.
Yeah, he
Look at
commends
your notes. The master commended his quick response.
The master did not commend, it's very important to know what the master did not commend him for. He was never commended for being unjust in the beginning.
Right. That's right.
He was
That's
only
right.
commended for his shrewdness.
That's right. And of course, you go back to the master. Remember the first words of the verse there. A certain rich man. He was a rich man. So he got rich also. Probably using some of the same efforts. And he notices this. So remember that. That's just a tidbit. And that's how we can kind of justify some of this.
So that may be what Jesus meant when he said he was not faithful in a little, will not be faithful in a lot. Maybe that's what this guy describes as.
Right. And remember, this is the least and the much of dishonesty. This is not the right way. We're talking about finances here, okay? We're talking about finances. We're going to get into it in just a second. But we're talking about finances, and Jesus is basically saying, he even mentions that when he talked about
No man can serve two.
unrighteous, let's see.
13.
Well, yeah, that's all part of it, but I'm talking about I'm talking about the one with the steward of light.
Oh,
He
doesn't
compares
matter.
the two, and the one with light would be the Christian one. The one would be following the Lord, and the other one is following the way of the world.
Verse 8.
Okay? Verse 8, right.
Wiser than
And the
children
Lord
of light.
commended the unjust steward because he had done wisely, for the children of this world are in their generation wiser than the children of light. That was the Lord's opinion,
Right.
the rich man's opinion. Okay?
Some Christians are so naive and gullible,
Yeah,
where
Yeah.
the worldling is shrewd, maybe in dishonest ways, but Christians can learn a thing or two from the world's
sure.
shrewdness.
Well, and there's some worldly things in there that are involved that we have to deal with. And they are neither bad nor good, but the whole object here is that we might bring glory to Christ. And we also might be a part of, we use our stuff, our substance, our monies, that it might ultimately save souls for Christ. Okay? Different axis totally. And that's what Jesus is talking about. And remember, not too much longer than this, Jesus does get crucified. And remember, the church starts up. And remember, one of the biggest things it started doing was to take care of everybody. Everybody starts selling their stuff and putting the money to the work. To the work for the cause of Christ. And remember, right out of the gate, what was one of the big things that happened that draw everybody's attention?
Ananias and Sapphira.
Right, Ananias and Sapphira. And they said, they sold a plot of land, and all they had to do was tell the truth.
Right.
If they would have just told the truth, I sold it for 100,000, but we're going to give 80,000 because
Right.
you know, that's what it was.
Right.
That's what it was.
Right.
But they didn't. They said they sold it for 100,000, and yeah, that's what gave the whole thing. They did.
They wanted to be seen as big
Right.
givers.
And because we talk about a lot of times, God uses to make an example. In the beginning, a lot of times God uses to make an example, and He used them to make an example. He used it way back in the Old Testament when they, right after they conquered Jericho. Remember that they used another example.
Achan.
Yeah, Achan, and hid the wedge of gold in the garment and brought sin into the camp. Well, God didn't want to put up with it. He didn't want to start that way. Okay, he didn't want to start that way. So Jesus is teaching here that principle. So, all right. So at the end there, the master commended his quick response, but still lost his job because he acted dishonestly. Because he acted dishonestly. He didn't do it right for the master. He didn't do it right for anybody. Okay? So what we do with that which is least reveals everything else about our lives.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. So, point one, our finances. Finances is blank. Point one, our finances. So, as we look at this parable, first thing we must consider is our finances. That's the first thing we got to consider, our finances. This is what it was about. The parable was about this rich man. He was rich for a purpose. He had stewards and things, and people working for him, and things had to work correctly, or else he wouldn't be a good steward of his stuff. So the first thing we must consider is our finances. Verse 1 of chapter 16, the "and" he says, speaking to his disciples now, and he's teaching his disciples now this important thing about that which is least. Is the part that in verse 10, he that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. So if you're faithful in the small thing, in how you handle a small amount of money, then, and he's used this principle all through Scripture. I'll make you rulers over many, faithful in few, rulers over many. So he's teaching this principle. And he was speaking to his disciples now. But remember, the same group that heard the lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost brother, and they're also listening in. The Pharisees, scribes, the sinners, and the tax collectors, the publicans. They're also listening in, but really he's trying to teach his disciples. So Christ told his disciples about the attitude the Pharisees had toward finances and the attitude his followers were to have toward finances. Two different directions here. And in your notes, there is nothing immoral about money. There's nothing immoral about money. Actually, it's amoral. Neither evil nor good. But what we do with it, money becomes the issue. Can become the issue, and it's I almost say it's the hardest, always. The love of money. We'll get into that in a second. The love of money is the root of all evil, not money. Everybody likes to say, "Well, money is the root of all evil." No. It's the love of money is the root of all evil. And right now, many of us wouldn't be here if we didn't have some monies to put some gas in these vehicles to get us here. There's some things we have to have, and we ought to be good stewards of that too. Good stewards of that. But he's talking to rich. He talked about the parable was a certain rich man. Christ was teaching the attitude toward finances should be different to his followers. Okay? And Christ also continued. You have that big parable there. And then if you move on down through it, after verse 14, Pharisees heard, they derided him, they despised him because he said what he said. Jump on down to 19. And a lot of people call this the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. But if you notice, I don't know what kind of Bible you have, but mine always calls out little lines over the side. And every time there's a parable, it says the parable of the unjust steward. But when it comes to this, it says the rich man and Lazarus. It doesn't say parable anymore. And most people say parables don't have names. It doesn't call out names. It just calls out the certain rich man, the unjust steward, blah, blah, blah. That's what it does. This story, I think, and most agree, and we'll read it. Let's go ahead and read it. You've probably read it before. And we're only going to read part of it because it goes along with the rich man. But verse 19 in chapter 16. There was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen and fared sumptuously every day. Guess what? He's got a lot of things that he is putting great value in, and he's not only his clothing in purple, fine linen, fared sumptuously every day, had the best meals, did the greatest things. I mean, he had it all. He had all the monies. He had it all. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate full of sores and desiring to be fed with the crumbs which fell from the rich man's table. That's the way he survived. Moreover, the dogs came and licked his sores. No mercy from people, no physical help, and to lean on the dogs to get any help at all. And it came to pass, verse 22, and it came to pass that the beggar died and was carried by angels into Abraham's bosom. The rich man also died and was buried. Now, one was carried into Abraham's bosom, which we can get into a lot there, but right now that's heaven. Okay, we'll call that heaven. And he was carried into Abraham's bosom, and so he did some things down on earth that counted for the right things. He put faith in the right spot, and he was saved. He was taken to Abraham's bosom. But he said and they both were buried. But in hell, the rich man, and in hell lift up his eyes, being in torments, and seeth Abraham afar off, and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried and said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water, and cool my tongue, for I am tormented in this flame. That's all we're going to read of that. There's more to it, but Jesus used that as a striking contrast when you put your faith and trust in mammon and in earthly things and in yourself and in your monies and everything else and your sumptuous meals and all that stuff, and you don't take care of the other part. This is where you're going to end up. I think this is a true story, and I think he's still there. That's what I think. This is not called a parable, all right? But Jesus used that story. Now, let's go to 1 Timothy, if you would, Peter. Look up 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through 10. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 through 10. Go ahead.
But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us be therewith content. But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows.
Okay, the love of money. And these men, maybe they started small, but they ended up getting really hung into their finances and their monies and all these things. They put great faith in it. And he even goes on to say, from the faith, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. So often, tying into riches and loving it, you end up paying the price on this side, all kinds of sorrows and so forth. Doesn't mean a rich man can't be saved. He can't be saved. But it's hard. So we learn here, did I get you to the part in your notes? There is nothing immoral about money. It is amoral. It is neither sinful or good. What we do with money, we do as blanks, becomes the issue. So, it's the love of money. It's not the root of all evil. Once again, it's not the money. We don't want to get hung up because even as Christ talked about in verse 16, he said, if therefore ye have not been faithful in the unrighteous mammon, who will commit to your trust the true riches? And if ye have not been faithful in that which is another man's, who shall give you that which is your own? But he's talking about have been faithful in unrighteous mammon, and talking about monies, but we need to be faithful in it. We don't need to be, we need to use it for the cause of Christ. Now, does that mean every dime goes for, our tithes and so forth? No, God wants to take care of us, and he's going to use that to take care of us. But we ought to have a different pecking order, okay? We shouldn't be out to, it's not all about making money every dime and so forth. If we get consumed into that, then we're not going to be interested in the missionaries we hear about on Sunday evening. That portion of our offering, I think the offering for our missionaries is an offering. It's above the tithe. There's also the tithe. And that's just the beginning. That's just the beginning. That's just talking about money. We'll get into some more things here in a moment. But So, the whole thing about it, our finances, is there's a difference from Christian finances, and there would be somebody that is worldly or earthly finances, just struck on taking care, getting all I can all I get, that kind of thing. There's a difference. There's a difference. Point two.
I know people at work that they buy a lottery ticket all the time.
Yeah, yeah, you just burn it away. And
Because the chances in lottery are against you, the odds are against you,
Mhm.
it's not wise to do something that's against you. If you know the odds are against you in anything, if you know the chances of getting in a car accident are against you, you wouldn't go in a car, it's be foolish. But the chances are not that way when we drive. You put a seatbelt on and you drive safely, the chances of getting in a car accident are much slimmer. That's why we drive every day.
That's right. And we got a good clientele of ages here, young to more mature along the way.
But when the odds are,
Aging.
And we're still here.
Aging.
when the odds are against you, you don't
Right.
do that.
That's right, that's
But
right.
people do that anyway. They buy a lottery ticket,
Oh, yeah.
even though knowing the odds are against them.
Yeah, or they go, or you get, well,
And you have no
and that
control
also,
over it.
Right.
When
And
you
that
drive,
can-
you have a little control
Good
over
point.
what's gonna happen.
Good
point.
I mean, or what may happen.
that launches you into
Good point.
gambling.
Amazing.
It's a gamble. And gambling, you know, I'm sorry, but gambling, just, you know, any of that that's what that amounts to. You're taking a absolute chance on your money, a chance. Now, there's some things you do, and you buy something that's you know, a car or something, and you knew you gotta get it because it's the cost it is, if you only have that much money, you get it, and the car doesn't last too long or something like that, it's different. That's different, that's
Yeah.
not gambling. That's just the way some of the cards play out sometimes. And most of us, when we started out having cars, and when we get where we're going, older down the road, things get a little bit better along the way, but we have to get what we have to get going. You know, and the furniture we had back then and all that. And I think that is being faithful in least, okay? Being faithful in least. And as we continue to go, trust, pray, and you know, of course, be a child of King, being saved, born again, and know Jesus Christ as your Savior. It doesn't mean things aren't hard sometimes when you get started, but things like faithful in least will make you faithful in much. You will end up getting, you'll be banking up in heaven. Okay?
Some people say, well, I'll be faithful when I have $1,000. But it's the dollar that God gives you. He wants to see what you do with the $1 he gives you.
That's right, that's exactly.
But if you blow it on bubble gum or something, then, not that that's wrong, but I'm just saying, you know, if you blow the $1, why would he give you 1,000?
That's kind of the way it is playing out. And it plays out because that is the way it goes. You come out from underneath the umbrella of faith, I say. And all those things can happen. Doesn't mean bad things don't happen to even good, Bible-believing, studied-up Christians. Doesn't mean bad things don't happen. But they trust him through the bad. They continue to go. And but most certainly, if you live on the being ignorant to it, I tell you what, you'll fight a hard life, and everything will cost you more. I think if you really love money, everything will cost you more. Your vehicle won't stand up. Your flat tire will be, there'll be just all kinds of things happen. Well, let's go to point two. Point two, our friendships. Our friendships. In your notes, the dishonest steward cared nothing for his Lord and stole from him so that he might have friends to take him in when he lost his job. Okay, that was the layout. He represents the way of the Pharisees. They cared only for themselves and used every means to get ahead. And remember, Pharisees cared only for themselves. If our faith is not right, our finances will not be right. Okay? If our faith is not right, our finances will not be right.
You think the people who were on the receiving end and say the guy comes to you and says, here, write 50, if you owe 100, write 50. Should they have said, no, I owe 100, I want to stick with 100?
Yeah, but I think that they're talking about the whole thing was slanted on the world's agenda, I think. You know, the Lord was, even the Lord was. In the parable, the certain rich man, he was too, my mind.
I'm just saying, if somebody wants you to be dishonest,
Oh, yeah.
if you know they're being dishonest, I mean, these people may not have known he was gonna lose his job.
Right.
I don't know, but if somebody says, here, I'll cut you a deal, I don't think we should do that. I don't think,
Yeah.
if they're being dishonest, I think we should.
Oh, I agree. And if you, I mean, you know, you smell a rat.
If the store.
You know, if you're living right, you usually, this is a smell, it's not passing the smell test.
It's too good to be true.
What?
Too good to be true.
Right. Typically, that's exactly what it is.
I mean, there are times I'm at Walmart or something, they'll say, they'll discount something. And they'll say, okay, you take it for 10% off. That's different. They have the authority to do that.
Yeah.
But if they just say, here, take it, just take it, walk away with it, keep it without paying for it.
Yeah.
I think the Christian should say, no, I want to pay for it.
Yeah. Well, you know, that's kind of a long ongoing thing. A lot of times, you know, you ever get done, especially now with all the self-checkouts, you check out, you know, you can't even get a regular, you can't go down the line hardly anymore, you gotta check out yourself. I don't know how many times I've done that, put it in bags, got checked out, and then there's a piece over here that didn't get checked out by me. Go back around, go in there and go do it again, you know, that's what we should do, right? And
even if the clerk says, just take it.
what,
That's what I'm saying.
if I went that far, I wouldn't say that.
Anyway, so these
So-
people they were offered a chance to be dishonest.
That's right.
And these are the people that were going to take him in afterwards. These were his friends.
Yeah. So this is not the attitude Christ's disciples are to have. They used every opportunity to get ahead, the Pharisees did. This isn't the attitude that Christ's disciples had. In your notes there, Christ said in verse 9, make to yourselves friends of the mammon of unrighteousness. He was saying that we can use money for the cause of Christ, to win friends. And this does not mean to win friends to ourselves, but to Christ, to win friends to Christ, okay? We, you know, where our monies go, hopefully, ultimately, a lot of times when they pray for the offering, that souls might be saved,
Yes.
okay? So that is the, you know, that's why we're here at church too, doing God's bidding, through Jesus Christ, the Son of God, who will save the lost. That's what his drive was. He came to seek and to save that which was lost. So, wrapping it up quick. But to Christ, when we die, they will receive us into everlasting habitation. This means that we use the money God places in our hands for the cause, that's the next blank, cause of Christ, by means of that mammon. By that mammon, okay? Some people consider mammon bad, but God, we still use it. We can see souls come to Christ when we die. And, you know, I think of that sometimes when missionaries, we hear a report, 6 people. Is that to our account? You bet. You bet. And someday, maybe when we enter into heaven, they'll say, thank you. Thank you, I'm here because of your faithfulness to that missionary that was faithful to me. How about that? So, that's where we are. And then what we should do with the money that God places in our hands is to give it to the cause of Christ. That's what we're supposed to do. Our faith is the last point. Our faith. Third thing we must consider in our faith, he that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. What is least? That's the blank. What is least? And what is much? Through eyes of faith, we see the difference. The least refers to things of this earth, okay? These things down here, we might be faithful in our monies. We might be faithful in, and think of some things down here. How about our time? Should we be faithful in our time? Absolutely. How about our things? Should we be faithful in our things? I mean, if we have things like RVs and boats, not that I don't mind, I mean, I like boats, and all that stuff, but if those things got in front of the cause of Christ, that'd be a problem. That'd be a problem. So we be faithful in the least of these things. How about our job? How about our position? How about those things? How about dress? How about apparel? What we wear? Is there a difference in the Christian? Should be. Should be. I tell you what, that we're living in the day of long, loose, and lots of it. It's gone. It's gone. And it is, as Miss Neva would always say, ain't that a sight? She always said that. She's still kicking. She's right at 100. Still kicking. She called me a couple weeks ago and checked on me from my surgery. Ain't that a sight, she'd say. But I tell you what, Christians, well, be faithful. Faithful in the least. And then we can see some heavenly fruits. Okay? So the least refers to the things of this earth. The much refers to the things in heavenly view. As we do what is right with the least, we are doing what is right with the much. So the key of this parable is being faithful in least. And Jesus was concerned that his disciples would not be as the Pharisees with their finances, but would be, they would be seeking for the cause of Christ. And that happened quickly. The church exploded. Peter preached, thousands saved, needs were many, people were giving their monies, and all that kind of thing. So for the cause of Christ. I mean, the church got launched, and boy, and it was a what do you call it? Explosive thing. Because when it happened, I mean, a lot of people didn't like it. Of course, all the crunch came down on it finally, but it's still, there's always been the remnant, and it's still continued, and it's based on these principles, these parables. Our faith, even in times of trial. Don't be surprised that you'd have trials and troubles and tribulations. Don't be surprised. But it's our faith in Christ one day at a time. Just keep at it. And use what God has placed in your hands for his glory. Use what God, it's in your notes too, God has placed in his hands for his glory. We're way over. And
the obvious truth there is that there is a relationship between worldly things and our spiritual life.
that's right.
And a Christian can't say, well, money is mine, it's just earthly stuff, I'll do what I want with my money. When it comes to spiritual things, sure, I'll give God Sunday, but my money is mine. No, Jesus is saying there's a relationship between how you use your money and your spiritual life.
Yeah. He said basically, you're all mine.
Right.
You're all mine.
True.
But you can use, and even in a tithe.
We can't just use
it's all mine, but you tithe.
Right.
And you know, that's how God works. And the more faithful we get, normally that tithe ends up gaining. It ends up gaining. Let's do this real quick. I know we're late. And the lesson aims to explain that God